Imagine waking 40,000 years ago, not to the gentle aroma of coffee or the thought of breakfast, and certainly no smartphone to check the forecast. Instead, a bone-deep ache settles in, the air inside your shelter a stinging 20 below zero. Every breath outside is a frozen blade. You hear the terrifyingly close rumble of mammoths and the sharp, violent crack of trees snapping under the weight of ice. There's no central heating, no easy comforts, just one brutal truth. The next 60 minutes decide if you and everyone you love makes it to sunset. Every move, every choice, every single second of their morning ritual could spell the difference between life and death. Winter wasn't just about the cold. It was a relentless assault of biting darkness, gnawing hunger, and predators pushed to their absolute limits. Yet these weren't simply victims of circumstance. The first ominous rumbles echo. Then, with a sudden terrifying crack, the sky rips open, a jagged scar of lightning, exposing a landscape that would make even the most hardened survivalist gasp. Thunder explodes like artillery, vibrating the ground right under your feet. The rain isn't falling. It's a horizontal assault driven by winds that could lift you off your feet. But look closer. See it there, carved into the limestone cliff. A warm, inviting glow pushes back against the storm's raw power. Inside, gathered around a carefully coaxed fire, a family of humans is calmly weathering nature's fit. This isn't the cowering, knuckle-dragging cave dweller burned into your mind by Hollywood. This is 40,000 years ago, and these are engineers, architects, and survival specialists. They turned Earth's most violent weather into survivable challenges. They didn't just survive megastorms, they thrived through them, building shelters so sophisticated that modern emergency planners would be furiously taking notes. Welcome to the real saga of how your ancestors defied the storm. Erase everything you thought you knew about cavemen huddled in dark, damp caves, trembling from thunder. The archaeological evidence lays bare a truth far more astonishing. Prehistoric humans who grasped weather patterns with startling clarity, engineered stormproof shelters, and forged survival systems that kept families alive through Ice Age blizzards, raging floods, and tempests that would bring our own modern infrastructure to its knees. Here's what will truly shock you. These ancient humans weren't merely reacting to the storms. They were predicting them, preparing for them, and in countless instances barely missing a beat when nature unleashed its absolute worst. They constructed multi-level shelters equipped with ingenious ventilation systems, crafted waterproof clothing that genuinely rivals your contemporary rain gear, and mastered fire management techniques capable of sustaining warmth for weeks without a single interruption. The undeniable proof of their ingenuity is scattered across the globe, hidden within caves and rock shelters. From the brutal, frozen steppes of Siberia to the sun-drenched limestone cliffs of southern France, each site whispers the same story. It's a tale of humans who vehemently refused to be mere victims of the weather, who instead became its undeniable masters. They took nature's most terrifying fury and transmuted it into a predictable challenge, consistently devising reliable solutions. But here's where it becomes truly captivating. These weren't just bare-bones survival shelters. Oh no. These were elaborate living spaces, meticulously designed with distinct zones for various activities, organized storage systems for crucial emergency provisions, and even communal areas where families gathered during the storm's most terrifying crescendo. Archaeological findings powerfully indicate that some of these shelters were continuously inhabited for thousands of years, lovingly passed down through countless generations, much like cherished ancestral homes. The megastorms they faced, they make your current weather events look like gentle summer showers. Picture this: Ice Age blizzards that clamped down for weeks, with temperatures plummeting to a mind-numbing -40 degrees Celsius, floods that consumed entire valleys, transforming them into temporary treacherous lakes, windstorms so incredibly powerful they could strip bark from trees and hurl stones through the air like deadly missiles. Yet these humans not only survived such cataclysmic conditions, but also maintained complex societies, created breathtaking art, and raised children who grew up to be just as incredibly skilled at storm survival as their own parents. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, researchers have unearthed evidence of continuous human occupation, extending back nearly 2 million years. Consider that for a moment. The same shelter system, refined and improved over millennia, safeguarding families through countless storms, droughts, and natural disasters. This wasn't mere chance. This was engineering on a scale that would impress modern architects. The cornerstone of their success wasn't simply finding shelter, but recognizing that shelter was a comprehensive system, not merely a structure. They developed integrated approaches that combined optimal location, sound construction, efficient heating, secure food storage, meticulous water management, and even effective waste disposal. Every component worked in concert to create environments where humans could not only survive but truly flourish during the harshest weather Earth could unleash. The cave paintings at Lascaux in France were more than just art. They served as weather forecasting guides, depicting animal behavior patterns that predicted seasonal changes. The bone tools found at numerous sites were not just hunting implements. They were precision instruments used for shelter construction and maintenance. The fire hearths were not simply sources of warmth. They were the central hubs of sophisticated climate control systems. Perhaps most remarkably, these ancient humans grasped a concept that modern emergency planners are only now beginning to understand. The most effective storm shelter isn't just about surviving the storm, but about maintaining normal life throughout it. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that during the most severe weather, these prehistoric families continued their daily routines. Children played, adults crafted tools and clothing, and the community remained strong. The sophisticated nature of their storm preparation becomes strikingly clear when examining sites like Kostenki in Russia, where researchers uncovered circular structures built from the bones of at least 60 woolly mammoths. These were not desperate makeshift shelters. They were meticulously planned and engineered buildings designed to endure the most extreme weather conditions imaginable. The immense time and effort required to construct these mammoth bone houses suggests that storm preparation was a community-wide priority, engaging entire groups for months at a time. Even more impressive is their ability to adapt shelter systems to diverse environments and weather patterns. In the frozen north, they built partially underground shelters that leveraged the Earth's natural insulation. In flood-prone areas, they constructed elevated platforms and developed sophisticated drainage systems. In regions susceptible to high winds, they engineered aerodynamic designs that deflected, rather than resisted, the storm's force. The clothing technology they developed was equally sophisticated. When the first humans migrated to northern climates approximately 45,000 years ago, they faced a challenge that would have annihilated lesser species: how to stay warm and dry in conditions that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Their solution involved layered clothing systems, waterproof outer garments, and even heated clothing that utilized heated stones as portable warming devices. However, the true breakthrough occurred around 30,000 years ago with the invention of the needle. This small tool, barely 3 inches long, revolutionized storm survival by enabling humans to create fitted waterproof clothing that could keep them warm and dry even in the most brutal conditions. The distinction between loose animal hides and properly sewn garments was literally the difference between life and death during a megastorm. The fire management techniques they developed were perhaps the most critical component of their storm survival system. Controlling fire provided warmth, light, cooking capabilities, and a vital psychological comfort during the long, dark hours when storms raged outside. Yet, maintaining fire during storms demanded an advanced understanding of airflow, fuel management, and fire safety that rivals modern expertise. At Kesem Cave in Israel, archaeologists have discovered evidence of continuous fire use spanning 200,000 years. The hearths exhibit sophisticated design features, including smoke management systems, dedicated fuel storage areas, and even specialized cooking zones. These were not merely campfires. They were the core of climate control systems capable of maintaining comfortable temperatures even when outside conditions were lethal. The social organization necessary for effective storm survival was equally impressive. These were not individual families struggling in isolation. They were organized communities with specialized roles, shared resources, and robust mutual support systems. During storms, everyone had specific responsibilities: fire tenders, food preparers, tool maintainers, and sentries who monitored conditions and made decisions about when it was safe to venture outside. The evidence for their weather prediction abilities is particularly fascinating. Cave paintings and artifact patterns suggest that these ancient humans could interpret environmental signs and forecast incoming storms days or even weeks in advance. They understood seasonal patterns, changes in animal behavior, and atmospheric conditions that modern meteorologists recognize as storm precursors. Their food storage systems were specifically designed for storm scenarios. They developed techniques for preserving meat, storing plant foods, and even maintaining fresh water supplies during extended periods when hunting and gathering were impossible. Some sites show evidence of food caches capable of sustaining families for months, indicating that storm preparation was a year-round activity. The construction techniques they employed for their shelters reveal an understanding of structural engineering that wouldn't be formally recognized until modern times. They knew how to distribute weight, create stable foundations, and construct structures that could flex with strong winds rather than breaking. The mammoth bone houses found across northern Europe provide evidence of sophisticated joint systems, precise weight distribution calculations, and even architectural planning that required abstract thinking and mathematical concepts. Water management was another critical element of their storm survival strategy. They developed techniques for collecting, storing, and purifying water during storms when normal sources might be contaminated or inaccessible. Some shelters exhibit elaborate drainage systems that prevented flooding while still allowing access to fresh water. The psychological aspects of storm survival were equally important. These ancient humans understood that maintaining morale and mental well-being during extended periods of confinement was crucial for survival. They developed entertainment systems, storytelling traditions, and even games that kept families occupied and emotionally stable during the worst weather. The tool maintenance and repair systems they developed were essential for storm survival. When confined in a shelter for days or weeks, the ability to repair and maintain equipment becomes critical. Archaeological evidence indicates that storm shelters included dedicated workspaces where tools could be sharpened, clothing repaired, and new equipment manufactured. Their understanding of group dynamics and conflict resolution was sophisticated enough to prevent social breakdowns that could be fatal during extended confinement. They developed systems for sharing resources, resolving disputes, and maintaining the cooperation essential for survival. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their storm survival systems was their sustainability. These were not one-time solutions. They were systems that could be maintained and improved over generations. Families passed down knowledge, techniques, and even specific shelter sites through oral traditions that preserved crucial survival information across centuries. The evidence suggests that storm survival was not just about enduring individual weather events. It was about maintaining the cultural and technological knowledge that made human civilization possible. During their most severe storms, when normal activities were impossible, these ancient humans used their shelter time to transmit vital knowledge to the next generation. Excavated sites show evidence of continuous occupation and improvement over thousands of years. Each generation added innovations, refined techniques, and expanded the capabilities of their storm survival systems. This was not merely survival. It was cultural evolution driven by the necessity to master nature's most challenging conditions. What emerges from the archaeological evidence is a portrait of humans who were not just survivors, but innovators. Not just reactive, but proactive. Not just individuals, but communities working collaboratively to solve the fundamental challenge of staying alive in a hostile environment. They transformed storm survival from a desperate struggle into a refined art that allowed human civilization to flourish, even in the most demanding conditions. The sophistication of their approaches to storm survival challenges our modern assumptions about prehistoric life and reveals capabilities that we're only beginning to comprehend. These were not primitive people cowering in dark caves. They were skilled engineers, weather forecasters, and survival specialists who developed solutions that modern emergency planners study and admire. The next time you hear a weather report warning of an incoming storm, remember that 40,000 years ago, humans were already masters of storm survival, employing techniques and systems that kept families alive and communities strong through weather events that would challenge our modern infrastructure. They didn't just survive the storm, they transformed it into an opportunity to strengthen their communities and pass down the knowledge that would ensure their descendants' survival. The real breakthrough in prehistoric storm survival wasn't just about finding shelter. It was about transforming caves from natural formations into engineered living systems. At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, archaeologists made a discovery that fundamentally rewrites our understanding of ancient shelter construction. The evidence indicates that nearly 2 million years ago, human ancestors weren't just occupying caves, they were renovating them. Imagine standing at the entrance of a limestone cave as a massive storm approaches. But this isn't just any cave. The entrance has been meticulously modified with stone walls that create a wind barrier while still permitting airflow. The floor has been levelled and covered with layers of grass bedding that researchers found perfectly preserved. The walls bear scorch marks from fires strategically positioned to maximize heat distribution while minimizing smoke accumulation. These ancient engineers understood a principle that modern architects are only beginning to fully appreciate. Caves are not merely hollow spaces. They are complex environmental systems that can be optimized for human habitation. The stable temperature of caves provided natural climate control, staying cool in summer and warm in winter. But prehistoric humans took this natural advantage and significantly enhanced it with modifications that would make modern HVAC engineers envious. Their air circulation systems were particularly ingenious. At sites across Europe, researchers have found evidence of carefully positioned hearths that created convection currents, drawing fresh air from the entrance while venting smoke and stale air through natural chimneys. They understood that smoke management wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Poor ventilation could render a cave uninhabitable within hours, turning a life-saving shelter into a death trap. But here's where it becomes truly fascinating. They didn't just solve the smoke problem, they weaponized it. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites shows that prehistoric humans employed controlled smoke as a pest management system, driving out insects, small predators, and even dangerous animals that might compete for the same shelter. They transformed a potential liability into a strategic advantage. The construction techniques they used to modify caves reveal an understanding of structural engineering that wouldn't be formally recognized for thousands of years. At Bhimbetka in India, researchers found evidence of cave modifications that included weight-bearing walls, drainage systems, and even primitive plumbing that channeled water away from living areas. These were not accidental improvements. They were planned engineering projects that required abstract thinking and mathematical concepts. The most impressive cave modifications involved creating multi-level living spaces within single cave systems. At sites like Grotte du Lazaret in France, archaeologists discovered evidence of platforms, storage areas, and even privacy partitions that divided large caves into functional family units. During storms, these divisions allowed multiple families to share shelter while maintaining the personal space necessary for psychological well-being during extended confinement. Water management within cave systems was another area where prehistoric humans demonstrated remarkable innovation. They developed techniques for collecting rainwater runoff, storing it in natural or artificial basins, and even filtering it through layers of sand and charcoal. Some caves show evidence of elaborate drainage systems that prevented flooding, while still providing access to fresh water throughout the storm season. The heating systems they created extended far beyond simple campfires. At Qasim Cave in Israel, researchers found evidence of specialized hearths with reflective stone arrangements that amplified heat output by up to 300%. They understood that different types of stones possessed different thermal properties. Some absorbed heat slowly and released it over time, while others reflected heat immediately. By combining these properties, they created heating systems that could maintain comfortable temperatures for days after the fire died down. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of their cave engineering was the development of modular shelter systems. These were not permanent modifications. They were adaptable improvements that could be quickly assembled when storms threatened. and just as quickly disassembled when conditions improved. Archaeological evidence shows that many cave modifications were designed to be temporary, allowing the same space to serve different functions depending on seasonal needs. The evidence from Border Cave in South Africa reveals another layer of sophistication. They developed standardized construction techniques that could be applied to different cave systems. This wasn't trial and error. It was systematic engineering knowledge that could be taught, learned, and passed down through generations. They had developed the prehistoric equivalent of building codes, ensuring that shelter modifications would be effective and safe. When caves weren't available, prehistoric humans demonstrated their engineering prowess by creating artificial cave systems. The mammoth bone houses found across northern Europe weren't just impressive architectural achievements. They were functional cave substitutes that provided the same environmental benefits as natural limestone formations. These structures utilized the insulating properties of bone, the thermal mass of earth, and sophisticated ventilation systems to create cave-like conditions above ground. The construction of these mammoth bone houses required community-wide cooperation and planning that rivals modern construction projects. At Kostenki in Russia, the circular structure built from 60 mammoth skeletons would have required coordinated effort from dozens of people over several months. The logistics alone, gathering materials, transporting massive bones, and assembling them into a stable structure, demanded project management skills that we typically associate with modern civilization. The dome-shaped design of these artificial caves wasn't accidental. Prehistoric engineers understood that curved surfaces distributed wind loads more effectively than flat walls. They knew that circular structures had no corners where wind could create pressure differentials that might lead to structural failure. They were applying principles of aerodynamics thousands of years before the science was formally understood. The waterproofing systems they developed for these artificial caves were equally impressive. They used layers of animal hides, plant materials, and even primitive caulking made from animal fats and plant resins to create structures that could shed water as effectively as natural rock formations. Some sites show evidence of sophisticated drainage systems that channeled water away from the structure while preventing erosion that could undermine the foundation. The interior organization of these artificial caves followed the same principles as their natural counterparts. They created distinct zones for different activities: sleeping areas, cooking spaces, tool-making workshops, and even storage areas for emergency supplies. The layout wasn't random, it was meticulously planned to optimize workflow and maximize the efficient use of space during extended periods of confinement. The heating systems in these artificial caves were particularly sophisticated. Rather than relying on a single central fire, they developed distributed heating systems with multiple smaller hearths that could be controlled independently. This allowed them to heat specific areas as needed, while conserving fuel and reducing the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning that could occur in tightly sealed spaces. The social organization required to build and maintain these artificial cave systems was complex enough to rival modern construction companies. Archaeological evidence suggests that different families or groups had specialized roles. Some were responsible for gathering materials, others for construction, and still others for maintenance and repair. This division of labor allowed them to create structures that exceeded what any individual family could accomplish alone. The tool technology they developed specifically for cave construction and modification was remarkably specialized. They created precision instruments for cutting stone, shaping wood, and even measuring distances and angles. Some sites have yielded tools designed for specific construction tasks: stone chisels for carving drainage channels, wooden levers for moving heavy materials, and even primitive levels for ensuring that floors and walls were properly aligned. The time investment required for these construction projects was enormous, suggesting that storm preparation was a year-round activity rather than a seasonal concern. The evidence indicates that prehistoric communities dedicated significant portions of their time and resources to shelter construction and maintenance, treating it as one of their highest priorities. The quality control systems they developed for construction were sophisticated enough to ensure that structures would perform reliably during storms. Archaeological evidence shows that construction failures were rare, and when they occurred, the lessons learned were incorporated into future projects. This wasn't just building, it was continuous improvement through systematic testing and refinement. The maintenance schedules they developed for their shelters were equally systematic. They understood that regular inspection and repair were essential for ensuring structures would perform when needed. Some sites show evidence of seasonal maintenance activities that kept shelters in optimal condition throughout the year. The storage systems they integrated into their shelters were designed specifically for storm scenarios. They created dedicated spaces for food, water, fuel, tools, and even raw materials that might be needed for emergency repairs. These weren't just random accumulations of supplies, they were carefully planned inventory systems that could sustain families for extended periods. The communication systems they developed for coordinating shelter construction and maintenance were sophisticated enough to ensure that knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. Archaeological evidence suggests that they developed standardized symbols and possibly even primitive writing systems for recording construction techniques and maintenance procedures. The testing procedures they used to verify that their shelters would perform during storms were remarkably systematic. They didn't just build structures and hope they would work. They tested them under controlled conditions and refined the designs based on the results. This iterative approach to engineering ensured that each generation of shelters was more effective than the last. The backup systems they developed for shelter failure were equally impressive. They understood that even the best designed shelter could fail under extreme conditions. Therefore, they created redundant systems and emergency procedures that could keep families alive even if their primary shelter was compromised. The integration of these shelter systems with their broader survival strategies reveals a level of systematic thinking that we associate with modern engineering. They didn't just solve individual problems, they created comprehensive solutions that addressed the full range of challenges associated with storm survival. The evidence suggests that these prehistoric engineers understood concepts that wouldn't be formally recognized until modern times: system redundancy, failure analysis, performance optimization, and continuous improvement. They were applying advanced engineering principles thousands of years before engineering became a formal discipline. The legacy of their shelter engineering innovations can be seen in modern emergency preparedness systems. Many of the principles they developed, modular construction, distributed heating, water management, and community coordination, are still used by modern emergency planners who face the same fundamental challenges of keeping people alive during extreme weather events. The sophisticated nature of their approach to shelter construction and storm survival challenges our assumptions about prehistoric intelligence and capability. These weren't primitive people making do with crude tools. They were skilled engineers solving complex problems with systematic approaches and sophisticated solutions. The archaeological evidence reveals that storm survival wasn't just about individual ingenuity. It was about collective intelligence, applied over generations to solve one of humanity's most fundamental challenges. They transformed shelter construction from a desperate survival activity into a refined engineering discipline that enabled human civilization to flourish even in the most challenging environments. Storm preparation didn't begin when dark clouds gathered on the horizon. It started the moment the last storm ended. What archaeologists discovered at sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic reveals a level of forward planning that would impress modern emergency management agencies. These prehistoric communities operated on what we might call a storm cycle mentality, where every season was simultaneously a recovery from the last major weather event and preparation for the next one. The evidence shows they maintained detailed mental maps of their territories that included not just where food and water could be found, but where emergency shelters were located, which routes remained passable during floods, and which elevated areas provided refuge during the worst storms. This wasn't casual knowledge, it was survival intelligence that required constant updating and verification. At Pavillan Cave in Wales, researchers found something that fundamentally changed our understanding of prehistoric planning: cache sites. These weren't just random storage locations, they were strategically positioned emergency supply depots that could sustain families during extended storms. The caches contained dried foods, tool-making materials, fire-starting supplies, and even emergency shelter components that could be quickly assembled when needed. The sophistication of these cache systems becomes clear when examining their distribution patterns. They weren't randomly scattered across the landscape. They were positioned at calculated intervals that corresponded to travel distances during severe weather. Someone walking through a blizzard or struggling against floodwaters could reach the next cache before exhaustion set in. This required mathematical thinking and systematic planning that we associate with modern logistics. But here's what's truly remarkable. These cache systems were maintained across generations. Carbon dating reveals that some cache sites were restocked and maintained for over 1,000 years. This wasn't just individual family planning. It was community infrastructure that required coordinated effort and shared responsibility. Families took turns maintaining different cache sites, ensuring that the entire network remained functional even if individual groups moved or died out. The weather prediction systems they developed were based on observations that modern meteorologists recognize as scientifically accurate. At Creswell Craigs in England, cave paintings depict animal behaviour patterns that correspond to atmospheric pressure changes preceding major storms. They understood that certain birds flew differently before storms, that mammals altered their feeding patterns, and that even insects changed their behaviour in response to barometric pressure shifts. The timing systems they used to coordinate storm preparation were surprisingly sophisticated. Without calendars or clocks, they developed methods for tracking seasonal patterns and predicting when storm seasons would begin and end. Archaeological evidence suggests they used astronomical observations combined with biological indicators like plant flowering patterns and animal migration timing to create accurate seasonal forecasts. The resource management systems they employed during storm preparation reveal an understanding of supply chain logistics that rivals modern business practices. They knew precisely how much food, fuel, and materials would be needed to sustain their communities during extended periods of confinement. More importantly, they developed systems for acquiring and stockpiling these resources without depleting the sources they would need for recovery after the storm passed. The quality control procedures they applied to their storm preparations were remarkably systematic. Archaeological evidence shows that they regularly tested their equipment, verified their food stores, and even conducted what we might call storm drills to ensure that everyone knew their roles and responsibilities when severe weather threatened. This wasn't just preparation, it was rehearsal for survival. The communication systems they developed for coordinating storm response were sophisticated enough to ensure that scattered family groups could coordinate their activities even when separated by miles of dangerous terrain. They used smoke signals, reflected light, and even sound systems that could transmit information across valleys and through forests. During storms, maintaining communication was often the difference between coordinated survival and catastrophic failure. The psychological preparation they undertook for storm survival was equally important. They understood that maintaining morale during extended confinement was crucial for group survival. Archaeological evidence shows that they developed entertainment systems, storytelling traditions, and even games specifically designed to keep families occupied and emotionally stable during the worst weather. This wasn't just passing time, it was psychological warfare against despair. The medical preparation they undertook for storm scenarios reveals an understanding of emergency medicine that was surprisingly advanced. They maintained supplies of medicinal plants, understood how to treat common storm-related injuries, and even developed techniques for performing minor surgery under primitive conditions. Some sites show evidence of medical equipment specifically designed for use during storms, when normal healing practices might be impossible. The tool maintenance and manufacturing systems they developed for storm survival were designed to handle the reality that equipment would break or wear out during extended use. They didn't just stockpile finished tools, they maintained supplies of raw materials and the knowledge necessary to manufacture replacements when needed. This required an understanding of metallurgy, stonework, and even textile production that could be performed under the constraints of storm shelter conditions. The leadership system they developed for storm survival were sophisticated enough to handle the complex decision-making required during extended emergencies. Archaeological evidence suggests that they had established hierarchies and decision-making processes that could function even under the stress of life-threatening conditions. This wasn't just about having someone in charge. It was about having systems that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining group cohesion. The innovation that occurred during storm preparation was remarkable. Rather than simply repeating traditional practices, they constantly experimented with new techniques and technologies. Some of the most significant advances in prehistoric technology occurred during periods of intense storm activity, when survival pressures forced rapid innovation and testing of new ideas. The trade networks they maintained were designed to function even during severe weather. They developed systems for exchanging critical resources with other communities, even when normal travel was impossible. This required an understanding of alternative transportation methods, weather-resistant packaging, and even diplomatic protocols that could maintain relationships during times of extreme stress. The training systems they developed for storm survival ensured that knowledge was transmitted from experienced survivors to younger community members. This wasn't just casual instruction. It was formal education that covered everything from technical skills to psychological preparation. Children learned storm survival techniques through hands-on practice that prepared them for the real challenges they would face as adults. The record-keeping systems they developed for storm preparation were sophisticated enough to preserve crucial information across generations. While they didn't have writing in a certain sense, they developed symbolic systems and oral traditions that could accurately transmit complex technical information about storm survival techniques, resource locations, and timing systems. The adaptation strategies they employed allowed them to modify their storm survival techniques based on changing environmental conditions. They understood that what worked during one type of storm might not work during another, and they developed flexible systems that could be adjusted based on specific circumstances. This required systematic thinking and the ability to generalize from specific experiences. The risk assessment procedures they used to evaluate storm threats were remarkably sophisticated. They didn't just react to immediate dangers, they developed systems for evaluating long-term risks and making decisions about when to evacuate, when to shelter in place, and when to modify their survival strategies based on changing conditions. The redundancy systems they built into their storm survival plans ensured that failure of any single component wouldn't result in catastrophic loss of life. They understood that even the best planned survival strategy could fail under extreme conditions. So they created backup systems and alternative approaches that could keep families alive even when their primary plans were compromised. The efficiency optimization they achieved in their storm survival systems was remarkable. They developed techniques for minimizing resource consumption while maximizing survival probability. This required an understanding of energy conservation, resource allocation, and even time management that allowed them to maintain their communities through extended periods of extreme hardship. The scalability of their storm survival systems allowed them to adapt their techniques to different group sizes and circumstances. Whether dealing with individual families or entire communities, they had developed approaches that could be scaled up or down based on available resources and personnel. This flexibility was crucial for maintaining effectiveness across different situations. The sustainability principles they incorporated into their storm survival systems ensured that their techniques could be maintained over long periods without depleting the resources they depended on. They understood that survival strategies had to be sustainable, not just for individual storms, but for the long-term survival of their communities. The integration of their storm survival systems with their broader cultural practices reveals how deeply embedded emergency preparedness was in their daily lives. Storm survival wasn't something they did occasionally. It was a fundamental aspect of their culture that influenced everything from their social organization to their technological development. The evidence suggests that these prehistoric communities had achieved something that modern emergency planners struggle with. They had created storm survival systems that were both highly effective and culturally sustainable. Their techniques weren't just practical. They were integrated into their way of life in ways that ensured continuous improvement and adaptation. The archaeological record reveals that storm survival wasn't just about surviving individual weather events. It was about maintaining the cultural and technological knowledge that made human civilization possible. During the worst storms, when normal activities were impossible, These ancient communities used their preparation time to strengthen their societies and pass down the knowledge that would ensure their descendants' survival. The sophistication of their storm survival systems challenges our modern assumptions about prehistoric capabilities and reveals a level of systematic thinking that we associate with modern civilization. These weren't primitive people struggling against nature. They were skilled planners and engineers who had developed comprehensive solutions to one of humanity's most fundamental challenges. The legacy of their storm survival innovations can be seen in modern emergency preparedness systems, but perhaps more importantly, in the cultural attitudes that enabled human civilization to survive and thrive through countless natural disasters. They didn't just survive storms, they created the foundation for human resilience that continues to serve us today. The clothing revolution that saved humanity from megastorms began with a discovery so simple it's almost embarrassing: the needle. Just 3 inches of polished bone with a tiny hole at one end, this tool transformed storm survival from a desperate struggle into a manageable challenge. Before the needle, humans draped themselves in loose animal hides that offered minimal protection against wind-driven rain and snow. After the needle, they created fitted, layered clothing systems that could keep a person warm and dry, even in the most brutal conditions. The archaeological evidence from sites like Sungir in Russia reveals clothing so sophisticated that modern outdoor gear companies study the techniques. A 28,000-year-old burial contained garments adorned with thousands of ivory beads, but the real innovation wasn't the decoration, it was the construction. The clothing showed evidence of multiple layers, fitted sleeves, and even waterproof seams that could shed water while maintaining breathability. This wasn't fashion, it was engineering. The layering systems they developed followed principles that modern mountaineers and polar explorers still utilize today. The base layer, often made from soft bird skins or specially prepared rabbit fur, wickered moisture away from the skin while providing insulation. The middle layer, typically reindeer hide with the fur intact, trapped warm air while allowing moisture to escape. The outer layer, frequently crafted from wolverine fur or specially treated seal skin, offered wind and water protection while maintaining flexibility. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. They understood that different parts of the body required different types of protection. Hand coverings were designed for dexterity while maintaining warmth. Foot coverings provided traction on ice while keeping feet dry. Head coverings protected against wind and rain while allowing for peripheral vision and hearing. Each element was optimized for its specific function while working as part of an integrated system. The waterproofing techniques they developed were particularly impressive. They discovered that certain animal fats, when properly processed and applied, could make materials completely waterproof while retaining flexibility. Fish skins, when correctly prepared, created garments that were both waterproof and breathable. They even developed techniques for creating seams that were completely watertight, using sinew thread and sealing compounds that could withstand hours of exposure to driving rain. The repair systems they integrated into their clothing were designed for field maintenance during storms. They understood that clothing would tear, seams would fail, and materials would wear out, especially during extended periods of harsh weather. So they developed modular construction techniques that allowed damaged sections to be replaced without compromising the entire garment. They carried repair kits that included needles, thread, patches, and even emergency fasteners that could temporarily fix critical failures. The heating systems they integrated into their clothing were surprisingly sophisticated. They used heated stones as portable warming devices, creating specially designed pouches that could hold hot stones against the body without causing burns. They understood that certain materials retained heat longer than others, and they incorporated these materials into their clothing design to maximize thermal efficiency. The insulation materials they developed went far beyond simple animal fur. They discovered that certain plant fibers, when properly processed, provided excellent insulation while being lighter than animal materials. They learned to create composite insulation systems that combined different materials to optimize warmth, weight, and durability. Some sites show evidence of insulation materials specifically designed for different temperature ranges and weather conditions. The ventilation systems they built into their clothing were designed to prevent overheating while maintaining protection from the elements. They understood that sweating inside waterproof clothing could be just as dangerous as getting wet from outside moisture. So they developed adjustable ventilation systems that could be opened or closed based on activity level and weather conditions. The sizing and fit systems they developed ensured that clothing would perform effectively for people of different body types and sizes. They understood that poorly fitting clothing could be life-threatening during storms, so they developed standardized sizing systems and adjustment techniques that could customize garments for individual users. Some sites show evidence of clothing designed to be adjustable, allowing the same garment to fit different people or to accommodate changes in body size due to seasonal weight fluctuations. The psychological aspects of their clothing systems were equally important. They understood that feeling warm and dry was crucial for maintaining morale during extended storms, so they incorporated comfort features into their designs. Soft linings, adjustable fits, and even decorative elements that helped maintain psychological well-being during the worst conditions. The maintenance schedules they developed for their clothing were designed to ensure that garments would perform when needed. They understood that regular cleaning, repair, and treatment were essential for maintaining the effectiveness of their clothing systems. Some sites show evidence of specialized tools and materials used specifically for clothing maintenance. The production systems they developed for creating storm clothing were sophisticated enough to outfit entire communities. They developed techniques for processing raw materials, standardized construction methods, and even quality control procedures that ensured consistent performance across different garments. This wasn't just individual craftsmanship, it was industrial production using prehistoric technology. The innovation that occurred in clothing design was driven by the constant challenge of improving storm survival. They experimented with new materials, tested different construction techniques, and continuously refined their designs based on real-world performance. Some of the most significant advances in prehistoric technology occurred in response to the need for better storm clothing. The trade networks they maintained were partially designed to obtain materials for clothing production. They understood that certain materials were superior for specific applications, and they developed trade relationships that could provide access to these materials even when local sources were unavailable. This required an understanding of material properties, transportation logistics, and even diplomatic relationships. The training systems they developed for clothing production ensured that knowledge was transmitted across generations. This wasn't just casual instruction. It was formal education that covered everything from material selection to construction techniques. Children learned clothing production through hands-on practice that prepared them for the real challenges they would face as adults. The storage systems they developed for clothing were designed to protect garments from damage during non-use periods, while keeping them readily available when storms threatened. They understood that clothing materials could be damaged by moisture, insects, and even light exposure, so they developed storage techniques that could preserve garments for extended periods. The emergency clothing systems they developed were designed for situations where normal clothing might be lost or damaged. They maintained supplies of emergency garments and even developed techniques for creating temporary clothing from available materials. This required an understanding of improvised construction techniques and alternative materials that could provide essential protection when normal clothing was unavailable. The fire management systems that prehistoric humans developed for storm survival were perhaps their most critical innovation. Fire provided warmth, light, cooking capability, and psychological comfort during the long, dark hours when storms raged outside. But maintaining fire during storms required an advanced understanding of combustion, fuel management, and safety that rivals modern expertise. The hearth designs they created were engineering marvels that solved multiple problems simultaneously. At Kesem Cave in Israel, researchers found evidence of hearths designed to maximize heat output while minimizing smoke production. These weren't just holes in the ground with fire in them. They were sophisticated combustion systems with carefully calculated airflow patterns, heat reflection surfaces, and even primitive chimney systems. The fuel management systems they developed were designed to maintain fires for extended periods without constant attention. They understood that different types of fuel burned at different rates and produced different amounts of heat. Wood provided quick hot fires for cooking and immediate warmth. Bone burned slower and longer, providing sustained heat for overnight warming. Fat could be used as a fire accelerant or burned by itself for long-duration lighting. The fire-starting techniques they mastered were reliable enough to work even in the worst conditions. They developed multiple methods for creating fire, from friction-based techniques that could work in any weather to spark-based methods that could ignite even damp materials. They maintained fire-starting kits that included tinder, kindling, and even emergency fire-starting material that could be used when normal methods failed. The safety systems they developed for fire management were designed to prevent the disasters that could occur when fire was used in confined spaces. They understood that carbon monoxide poisoning was a real danger in poorly ventilated shelters, so they developed ventilation systems that could remove dangerous gases while maintaining heat. They also developed fire containment systems that could prevent fires from spreading beyond designated areas. The heat distribution systems they created were designed to maximize the warming effect of their fires while minimizing fuel consumption. They used reflective surfaces to direct heat toward living areas, thermal mass systems that stored heat and released it slowly, and even primitive heat exchangers that could warm incoming air while venting exhaust gases. The lighting systems they developed using fire were sophisticated enough to provide adequate illumination for complex tasks even during the darkest storms. They understood that different types of flames provided different qualities of light, and they developed specialized lighting systems for different activities. Fat lamps provided steady, long-duration lighting for detailed work. Torch systems provided bright directional lighting for navigation and security. The cooking systems they integrated with their fire management were designed to maximize nutrition while minimizing fuel consumption. They developed techniques for cooking that could extract maximum nutritional value from available foods while using minimal fuel. They understood that proper cooking could make marginal foods safe and nutritious, extending their food supplies during extended storms. The signaling systems they developed using fire were designed to maintain communication with other groups even during the worst weather. They understood that smoke and light could be used to transmit information across long distances, and they developed standardized signaling systems that could convey complex messages using fire-based signals. The backup systems they developed for fire management ensured that loss of fire wouldn't result in catastrophic failure of their survival systems. They maintained multiple fire sources, developed techniques for quickly re-establishing fire if it was lost, and even created fire preservation systems that could maintain smouldering embers for days or weeks. The integration of fire management with their broader survival systems reveals how central fire was to their storm survival strategy. Fire wasn't just one tool among many. It was the foundation that made all their other survival techniques possible. Without reliable fire, their shelters would be uninhabitable, their food inedible, and their communities unsustainable. The innovation that occurred in fire management was driven by the constant need to improve efficiency and reliability. They experimented with new fuel sources, tested different hearth designs, and continuously refined their techniques based on real-world performance. Some of the most significant advances in prehistoric technology occurred in response to the need for better fire management during storms. The knowledge preservation systems they developed for fire management ensured that crucial techniques were transmitted across generations. This wasn't just casual instruction. It was formal education that covered everything from fuel selection to safety procedures. The loss of fire management knowledge could mean the death of entire communities. So they developed multiple redundant systems for preserving and transmitting this critical information. The evidence suggests that fire management wasn't just a practical skill. It was a cultural institution that shaped their entire approach to storm survival. The hearth was the center of their social organization, the focal point of their daily activities, and the foundation of their survival strategy. Their mastery of fire management was what allowed human civilization to survive and thrive through the worst weather conditions Earth could produce. The food preservation and management systems that prehistoric humans developed for storm survival were sophisticated enough to sustain communities through extended periods when hunting and gathering were impossible. They understood that storms could last for days or weeks, and they developed techniques for storing and preserving food that could maintain nutritional value while preventing spoilage. The drying techniques they developed were designed to remove moisture from foods while preserving essential nutrients. They understood that different foods required different drying methods, and they developed specialized techniques for meat, fish, plant foods, and even certain types of roots and tubers. Some sites show evidence of drying structures specifically designed for food preservation, with controlled airflow and temperature regulation. The smoking techniques they used for food preservation were integrated with their fire management systems to create dual-purpose operations that provided both food preservation and heating. They understood that certain types of smoke had preservative properties, while others were primarily for flavor. They developed techniques for controlling smoke composition and density to achieve optimal preservation results. The fermentation techniques they developed allowed them to create foods that could be stored for extended periods, while actually improving in nutritional value. They understood that certain types of controlled spoilage could create foods that were more digestible and nutritious than the original materials. Some sites show evidence of fermentation vessels and techniques specifically designed for creating long-term food storage. The fat processing techniques they developed were designed to create high-energy foods that could sustain people through extended periods of high caloric demand. They understood that fat provided more than twice the calories per gram compared to other food sources, and they developed techniques for rendering, storing, and using fat as both food and fuel. The storage container system they developed were designed to protect preserved foods from moisture, insects, and other sources of spoilage. They created waterproof containers from animal materials, developed sealing techniques that could maintain airtight storage, and even created pest-resistant storage systems that could protect food supplies from rodents and insects. The inventory management systems they developed ensured that food supplies would be available when needed, while preventing waste due to spoilage. They understood that different foods had different storage lives, and they developed rotation systems that ensured older foods were used before they spoiled while maintaining adequate reserves for emergencies. The rationing systems they developed were designed to ensure that food supplies would last through extended storms while maintaining adequate nutrition for all community members. They understood that different people had different nutritional needs based on age, size, and activity level, and they developed distribution systems that could provide appropriate nutrition while maximizing the duration of food supplies. The emergency food systems they developed were designed for situations where normal food supplies might be lost or damaged. They maintained hidden caches of emergency foods and even developed techniques for creating edible materials from otherwise inedible sources. This required an understanding of food chemistry and nutrition that allowed them to extract calories and nutrients from marginal sources. The cooking techniques they developed for preserved foods were designed to maximize palatability while maintaining nutritional value. They understood that preserved foods often required special preparation to be appetizing, and they developed cooking methods that could transform preserved foods into satisfying meals that maintained morale during extended confinement. The water management systems they developed were equally crucial for storm survival. They understood that access to clean water could become problematic during storms, and they developed techniques for collecting, storing, and purifying water that could maintain adequate supplies even when normal sources were unavailable. The collection systems they developed were designed to gather water from multiple sources, including rain, snow, and even atmospheric moisture. They created collection surfaces that could maximize water gathering while filtering out debris and contaminants. Some sites show evidence of elaborate water collection systems that could gather and store significant quantities of water during storms. The storage systems they developed for water were designed to maintain quality while preventing contamination. They understood that stored water could become unsafe to drink if not properly managed, and they developed techniques for maintaining water quality over extended periods. They created storage containers that could hold large quantities of water while preventing bacterial growth and contamination. The purification techniques they developed could make questionable water sources safe to drink. They understood that certain materials could remove contaminants from water, and they developed filtration systems using sand, charcoal, and even certain types of plants. They also developed techniques for using heat and other methods to kill dangerous organisms in water. The distribution systems they developed ensured that water would be available throughout their shelters without compromising storage or quality. They created primitive plumbing systems that could deliver water to different areas of their shelters while maintaining sanitary conditions. Some sites show evidence of water distribution systems that were remarkably sophisticated for their time. The conservation techniques they developed were designed to minimize water consumption while maintaining adequate hydration. They understood that water supplies might be limited during extended storms, and they developed techniques for maximizing the utility of available water while ensuring that everyone's needs were met. The integration of their food and water management systems with their broader survival strategy reveals how comprehensively they approach storm survival. These weren't just individual techniques. They were integrated systems that worked together to provide complete life support during the worst conditions. Their mastery of resource management was what allowed human communities to maintain themselves through extended periods of extreme hardship. The evidence suggests that food and water management wasn't just about survival. It was about maintaining the quality of life that made human civilization possible. During the worst storms, when normal activities were impossible, these ancient communities used their resource management systems to maintain social cohesion and cultural continuity that enabled them to emerge from storms stronger than when they entered them. The waste management systems they developed for extended shelter periods reveal an understanding of hygiene and health that was crucial for storm survival. When dozens of people were confined in small spaces for weeks at a time, improper waste disposal could create conditions that were more dangerous than the storm itself. They developed sophisticated systems for managing human waste, food scraps, and other refuse that could maintain sanitary conditions even in the most confined spaces. The latrine system they created were positioned to prevent contamination of living areas while remaining accessible during the worst weather. At sites like Paviland Cave, researchers found evidence of designated waste areas strategically located to use natural drainage and airflow to minimize odors and health hazards. They understood that waste management wasn't just about convenience. It was about preventing disease outbreaks that could kill entire communities. The composting techniques they developed transformed organic waste into useful materials rather than simply disposing of it. They understood that food scraps, human waste, and other organic materials could be processed into fertilizers, fuel, and even construction materials. Some sites show evidence of composting systems specifically designed for shelter environments, with controlled decomposition that minimized odors while maximizing utility. Forget everything Hollywood taught you about cavemen dragging knuckles and grunting. The archaeological evidence reveals something far more sophisticated, far more ingenious, and frankly, far more brutal than any movie dared imagine. Your ancestors weren't primitive brutes. They were survival engineers who transformed the frozen wasteland into humanity's first luxury hotel. But here's what will shock you. The difference between life and death often came down to 6 inches. 6 inches of carefully engineered bedding that could mean the difference between hypothermia and warmth, between predator bait and invisible shelter, between waking up refreshed or not waking up at all. I'm about to reveal the forgotten technologies that kept our species alive when Earth was trying its absolute hardest to kill us. We're talking about innovations so effective that modern outdoor gear companies are still trying to reverse engineer them, sleep systems so sophisticated that Navy SEALs would weep with envy, and survival strategies so ruthlessly efficient that they helped a hairless, weak ape species conquer a planet ruled by giants. The evidence comes from 3 revolutionary archaeological sites that have rewritten everything we thought we knew about Ice Age survival. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, researchers discovered 77,000-year-old bedding that would make a 5-star hotel jealous. At Border Cave, they found a pest control system that modern exterminators can't match. And at Ohalo too, they uncovered sleeping technology so advanced it took humanity 70,000 years to improve upon it. But this isn't just ancient history. As climate change threatens to destabilize our modern world, as supply chains collapse and technology fails, the survival wisdom encoded in these prehistoric sleeping systems might be the difference between thriving and dying in an uncertain future. Your ancestors faced down ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, and predators that could snap your spine like kindling. And they did it all while getting a better night's sleep than most modern humans. So settle in, because we're about to journey back to a time when your bedroom was a battlefield, your mattress was a miracle of engineering, and your pillow could literally save your life. Welcome to the ultimate guide to Ice Age bedding, where comfort met catastrophe, and somehow comfort won. The first bombshell drops at Sibudu Cave, South Africa, where Dr. Lynn Wadley made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. Layer after layer of sediment, each representing thousands of years, revealed the same pattern. Grass mattresses so sophisticated they'd shame modern manufacturing. But here's the kicker. These weren't random piles of vegetation. They were engineered sleep systems dating back 77,000 years. The construction was methodical, almost obsessive in its precision. The base layer consisted of sedge-grass stems arranged like a prehistoric box spring to provide structural support and drainage. But it's the top layer that reveals the true genius. Leaves from Cryptocarya woodii, a tree whose crushed foliage releases natural insect-repellent compounds. Your ancestors weren't just building beds, they were manufacturing bug-free zones in a world where a single infected bite could mean death. The dimensions tell their own story of Ice Age luxury. These mattresses measured up to 22 square feet, large enough for an entire family, and stood 12 inches thick. That's not a sleeping pad. That's a prehistoric California king. The compressed layers show evidence of repeated use, careful maintenance, and systematic replacement. This wasn't camping. This was permanent residential engineering. But here's where it gets really wild. When the bedding became too infested or worn, they didn't abandon it like modern hunter-gatherers. They burned it deliberately. The charcoal layers at Sibudu reveal a maintenance schedule that would impress any modern facility manager. Burn the old bedding, spread ash to deter insects, lay down fresh materials, rinse and repeat for 40,000 years. Think about the implications. This level of bedding technology required not just knowledge, but culture. Someone had to discover that Cryptocarya woodii repelled insects. Someone had to figure out the optimal grass-to-leaf ratio. Someone had to develop the burning protocols. And all of this knowledge had to be passed down through generations, refined and perfected across millennia. The chemical analysis reveals just how sophisticated this pest control really was. The crushed. Cryptocarya leaves don't just smell bad to insects. They contain compounds that disrupt insect nervous systems. It's essentially a natural pesticide factory built into every mattress. Your ancestors were practicing biochemical warfare against bugs 70,000 years before we invented DDT. But Sibudu wasn't unique. Similar bedding systems appear across Africa during the same period, suggesting this technology spread through trade networks and cultural exchange. By 77,000 years ago, humans had developed standardized sleep systems that were being shared across vast distances. The first global bedroom standards, if you will. The preservation at Sibudu also reveals something heartbreaking, evidence of family sleeping arrangements. The wear patterns show adult-sized impressions flanked by smaller depressions, children sleeping between parents for warmth and protection. In a world where cave bears denned feet away and leopards hunted at night, family beds weren't just about bonding, it was about survival. And here's the detail that will give you chills. They oriented their beds to face the cave entrance, always. Every single layer across 40,000 years of occupation shows the same pattern. Even in sleep, they were ready to fight or flee. The bedding wasn't just about comfort. It was a tactical position designed for rapid deployment in case of night attacks. The Sibudu bedding represents humanity's first victory over the hostile African night. For the first time in evolutionary history, our ancestors could sleep deeply, comfortably, and safely. This wasn't just better rest. This was the foundation of everything that followed. Because only a well-rested species could develop the complex culture, technology, and social structures that would eventually conquer the planet. 600 meters north at Border Cave, archaeologists uncovered something that made the Sibudu discovery look primitive. Here, 200,000 years ago, our ancestors weren't just making beds. They were running what can only be described as the world's first integrated pest management system. The setup was ingenious in its simplicity. Grass sheaves from the Panicoidea subfamily formed the base, broadleaf grasses chosen specifically for their cushioning properties and natural resistance to decay. But it's what came next that reveals the true sophistication. Layers of wood ash strategically spread between the grass layers like a prehistoric pesticide sandwich. The ash wasn't random. Chemical analysis shows it came from specific trees primarily. Tarcananthus or camphor bush, which burns to create ash with natural insecticidal properties. The microscopic structure of this ash is brutal to insects. It clogs their breathing apparatus, desiccates their exoskeletons, and creates an alkaline environment that destroys their eggs. It's chemical warfare disguised as housekeeping. But here's where Border Cave gets really impressive. The maintenance schedule. The occupants didn't just build these beds once and hope for the best. They operated on a systematic rotation, burning old bedding, analysing ash coverage, and timing new construction to optimize pest control. Archaeological evidence shows this system operated continuously for 160,000 years. That's longer than our species has existed outside Africa. The precision is staggering. The ash layers are exactly thick enough to deter insects without creating respiratory problems for humans. Too thin, and bugs break through. Too thick, and people can't breathe. Someone figured out the optimal ratio through trial and error, then encoded that knowledge into cultural practices that survived for millennia. The bedding arrangement reveals sophisticated understanding of cave dynamics. The sleeping areas cluster near the back wall, where body heat accumulates and predators can't approach from behind, but they're positioned to avoid the deepest recesses where carbon dioxide pools and humidity breeds disease. It's environmental engineering that would challenge modern architects. evidence of specialized tools appears throughout the border cave sequence: grass-cutting implements, ash spreaders, even what appear to be prehistoric bedding rakes for maintaining surface texture. These people weren't just using what they found, they were manufacturing purpose-built equipment for sleep system maintenance. The most remarkable discovery came from the microscopic analysis of the bedding layers. Human skin cells, hair, and even traces of ochre pigment, suggesting these beds weren't just functional, they were personal. Individual families maintained their own sleeping areas with distinctive arrangements, almost like prehistoric interior decorating. But the real genius was the integrated approach. The same ash that deterred insects also provided fire safety. It wouldn't ignite if sparks from the hearth landed on the bedding. The grass selection wasn't just about comfort. Different species had different burning characteristics, allowing for controlled maintenance fires that cleaned the bedding without destroying the cave. The social implications are staggering. This level of bedding sophistication required cooperation, planning, and resource management. Someone had to gather specific grasses during optimal seasons. Someone had to maintain the fires that produced the right ash. Someone had to coordinate the burning schedules to ensure continuous sleeping availability for the entire group. Border Cave reveals that 200,000 years ago our ancestors weren't just surviving, they were optimizing. They'd turned sleep from a vulnerable necessity into a comfortable, safe, and hygienic experience. The foundation was set for everything that would follow: the complex societies, the technological innovations, the cultural achievements that would eventually transform a small band of African apes into the dominant species on Earth. And it all started with figuring out how to sleep without being eaten, bitten, or frozen to death. The border cave bedding system wasn't just engineering. It was the beginning of human civilization, one comfortable night at a time. But if Sibidoo and Border Cave were impressive, Ohalo too was revolutionary. 23,000 years ago, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, our ancestors achieved something that wouldn't be seen again until the invention of modern mattress manufacturing. Mass-produced, standardized sleeping surfaces with integrated attachment systems. The preservation at Ohalo too is miraculous. Waterlogged sediments that captured every detail of daily life like prehistoric amber. And what they reveal is a bedding technology so advanced it seems almost alien for its time period. We're talking about engineered sleep surfaces that used materials science, mechanical engineering, and even early chemistry. The construction method was revolutionary. Instead of loose grass layers like earlier sites, the Ohalo 2 inhabitants created thick grass bunches and arranged them in overlapping patterns like prehistoric shingles, designed to shed moisture and distribute weight evenly. But here's the breakthrough. They used a clay-based adhesive to bind the grass bunches together, creating the world's first composite mattress material. The clay adhesive wasn't just mud. Chemical analysis reveals a sophisticated mixture. Local clay combined with organic binders, probably plant saps, heated to specific temperatures to achieve optimal adhesion without becoming brittle. They'd essentially invented a prehistoric polymer, a flexible, waterproof bonding agent that held the entire sleep system together. The engineering precision is mind-blowing. The grass bunches were sized uniformly, suggesting standardized manufacturing processes. The clay application shows consistent thickness and coverage patterns. Most impressively, the entire system was modular. Damaged sections could be replaced without rebuilding the entire bed. It's preventive maintenance thinking that wouldn't reappear until the Industrial Revolution. But Ohalo 2's real innovation was spatial optimization. Unlike the family-style bedding at earlier sites, these sleeping areas were individually sized and positioned. Analysis shows beds designed for single adults, couples, and family groups, each optimized for different thermal and space requirements. They'd invented custom bedding 20,000 years before anyone else. The positioning reveals a sophisticated understanding of indoor climate control. The beds weren't randomly placed, but positioned to take advantage of heat circulation patterns within the structures. Thermal mapping of the preserved floor surfaces shows that sleeping areas were located in zones that would maintain optimal temperatures throughout the night. These people understood convection currents. Tool marks on the preserved bedding show evidence of maintenance activities, regular fluffing to maintain loft, systematic replacement of worn sections, and even what appears to be seasonal reconfiguration, lighter arrangements for warm weather, denser configurations for cold periods. This wasn't static technology, it was adaptive engineering. The most stunning discovery was evidence of quality control. Some grass bunches show signs of being rejected and discarded. Microscopic analysis reveals inferior grass species, improper preparation, or inadequate sizing. Someone was inspecting these materials and maintaining manufacturing standards. Quality assurance 23,000 years ago. The social implications are staggering. This level of bedding sophistication required specialized knowledge, dedicated labor, and resource allocation that goes far beyond basic survival. The Ohalo 2 inhabitants weren't just making places to sleep, they were investing in comfort, health, and quality of life. This suggests a society with surplus resources and the leisure time to pursue optimization rather than mere survival. The preservation also reveals personal touches, wear patterns that suggest individual sleeping preferences, small modifications that indicate user customization, even evidence of repairs made with different materials, probably when preferred resources weren't available. These beds weren't just functional, they were personal spaces that people cared about and maintained. Perhaps most remarkably, the Ohalo 2 bedding shows evidence of continuous improvement. The lower layers use simpler techniques and materials, while upper layers show increasingly sophisticated methods. Someone was experimenting, innovating, and passing knowledge down through generations. This was active technological development, not static tradition. The Ohalo 2 site represents the moment when human bedding technology achieved something unprecedented. It became better than what nature provided. For millions of years, our ancestors had made do with whatever natural materials they could find. But at Ohalo 2, they began manufacturing superior alternatives. They'd crossed the threshold from using nature to improving upon it. This wasn't just about sleeping anymore. The Ohalo 2 bedding represents the birth of human engineering thinking. The idea that natural limitations could be overcome through knowledge, planning, and systematic improvement. Every technology that followed, from agriculture to spaceflight, flows from this fundamental insight. Humans don't have to accept the world as they find it. 23,000 years ago, beside an ancient lake, our ancestors achieved something profound. They didn't just survive the night, they conquered it. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for every comfort, every innovation, every achievement in human history. All because someone figured out how to sleep better than nature intended. But grass and clay were just the beginning. The real game changer came when our ancestors discovered they could turn their predators into their protectors by sleeping on their skins. The archaeological evidence reveals a transformation so profound it literally changed human physiology. The moment we began wearing the night instead of hiding from it. The story begins in Morocco, 300,000 years ago, where cut marks on animal bones tell a tale of desperate innovation. These aren't butchery marks, they're skinning marks made with tools specifically designed to remove pelts intact. Someone had figured out that the same animals trying to kill them could, in death, keep them alive through the night. The progression is written in stone tools across Africa and Europe. Early skinning implements are crude, effective only on small animals. But by 200,000 years ago, we see specialized hide-working tools that could process everything from rabbit fur to mammoth hide. These weren't weapons repurposed for skinning. They were purpose-built leather manufacturing equipment. The sophistication escalates rapidly. At sites across Europe, archaeologists find evidence of hide preparation that would impress modern tanners, scraping tools designed to remove fat without damaging the skin, smoking apparatus that preserved pelts for months, even early chemical processing using plant tannins and animal brains to create supple, waterproof leather. But it's the selection criteria that reveal true expertise. Analysis of preserved furs shows our ancestors weren't just using whatever they could kill, they were targeting specific animals for specific properties. Reindeer for winter coats, hollow hairs provide incredible insulation, wolf fur for moisture resistance, rabbit pelts for infant bedding. This was strategic resource harvesting based on a deep understanding of material properties. The numbers are staggering. A complete winter sleep system required at least 5 large animals, 2 reindeer for the base layer, 1 bear for the top covering, and multiple smaller animals for gaps and repairs. That's 2,000 pounds of predator that had to be killed, processed, and converted into bedding before winter arrived. The logistical coordination required would challenge modern manufacturing. The processing technology evolved at breakneck speed. By 100,000 years ago, hide preparation had become a specialized craft. Archaeological sites show dedicated leather working areas with sophisticated toolkits, scrapers for fat removal, smoothers for texture, piercing tools for joining pieces. These workshops produced bedding materials that lasted for years, not months. The thermal engineering was extraordinary. Fur bedding systems show evidence of layering principles that modern outdoor gear manufacturers still use. Moisture-wicking inner layers, insulating middle sections, and wind-resistant outer shells. A complete Ice Age sleep system could maintain body temperature in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in hours. But here's what separates human hide work from animal behavior. We didn't just use pelts, we improved them. Evidence from multiple sites shows our ancestors were modifying natural fur properties through processing techniques. Controlled stretching to increase surface area, chemical treatments to enhance water resistance, even primitive dyeing using ochre and plant materials. The social implications are profound. This level of hide processing required specialized knowledge that took years to master. Someone had to learn which animals to target at which times of year. Winter pelts are thicker. Someone had to develop the chemical processes that preserved skins without making them toxic. Someone had to figure out the construction techniques that turned random pieces into integrated sleep systems. The evidence shows these skills were primarily held by women. Toolware patterns on female skeletons, spatial analysis of leatherworking areas near hearths, even burial goods that include specialized hide processing equipment with female remains. This suggests that while men might have provided the raw materials through hunting, women were the engineers who transformed death into comfort. The quality standards were uncompromising. Rejected hide pieces appeared at every major site, furs that didn't meet requirements for softness, thickness, or durability. In a world where every resource was precious, the fact that people were discarding inadequate materials speaks to how critical proper bedding was for survival. The innovation continued relentlessly. By 50,000 years ago, we see evidence of composite fur systems, different animal skins sewn together to combine the best properties of each. Rabbit fur for softness against the skin, deer hide for structural integrity, wolf pelts for weather resistance. These weren't just blankets, they were engineered textile systems. The preservation at some sites is so good we can still see the stitching. Microscopic analysis reveals thread made from sinew, plant fibers, even human hair in emergencies. These sewing techniques show sophisticated understanding of stress distribution, load bearing, and thermal bridging. These people were textile engineers 40,000 years before weaving was invented. Perhaps most remarkably, the fur bedding shows evidence of inheritance, where patterns suggest some sleep systems were used by multiple generations, carefully maintained and passed down as family treasures. In a world where most possessions were utilitarian and disposable, bedding had become valuable enough to inherit. The transformation was complete. Our ancestors had gone from being prey that slept in terror to predators that slept in luxury, wrapped in the skins of everything that had once hunted them. They'd turned the food chain upside down and made their former predators into their servants. And every night as they settled into beds made from bear fur and wolf pelts, they were reminded of their victory over the hostile world that had tried so hard to kill them. This wasn't just survival, it was dominance, and it all started with figuring out how to sleep warm in a cold world. But even the most sophisticated fur bedding was useless without the one technology that separated humans from every other species on Earth: fire. The archaeological evidence reveals that our ancestors didn't just discover how to make fire. They invented the world's first central heating systems, turning caves into climate-controlled luxury suites that would make modern hotels envious. The revolution begins at Cavemen Cave in Israel, 400,000 years ago, where archaeologists uncovered evidence of controlled indoor fires that burned continuously for centuries. These weren't random campfires. They were engineered heating systems with dedicated fuel supplies, sophisticated ventilation, and even backup ignition sources. Someone had figured out how to domesticate fire itself. The thermal engineering was extraordinary. Cave hearths weren't randomly placed but positioned to maximize heat circulation while minimizing smoke exposure. Computational fluid dynamics models of preserved cave sites show that our ancestors understood convection patterns, heat reflection, and airflow in ways that modern HVAC engineers would recognize and respect. The fuel management reveals systematic planning that extended across seasons. Analysis of charcoal remains shows stockpiling of specific wood types: hardwoods for long-burning base fires, softwoods for quick ignition, even dried fungi and animal fat for emergency fuel when wood was scarce. These people were energy portfolio managers 400,000 years before economics was invented. But it's the integration with bedding systems that shows true genius. The positioning of sleep areas relative to hearths followed mathematical principles of heat distribution that weren't formally described until the 18th century. Beds placed too close would overheat and create fire hazards, too far away, and people would freeze. The optimal distance required understanding thermal radiation, air circulation, and human physiology. The evidence from European caves reveals even more sophisticated systems. At sites like Grotte du Lazare in France, archaeologists found evidence of zoned heating. Different areas maintained at different temperatures for different activities, sleeping areas kept warm but not hot, work areas with higher temperatures for tool making, storage areas kept cool to preserve food. These people had invented climate control. The maintenance systems were incredibly sophisticated. Firekeeping wasn't a casual responsibility, but a specialized role requiring deep technical knowledge. Archaeological evidence shows dedicated fire-tending tools, bellows made from animal bladders, fuel storage systems, even early chimney designs that channeled smoke away from living areas while retaining heat. The backup systems reveal planning that would impress modern emergency managers. Multiple ignition sources were maintained simultaneously, banked coals that could smoulder for days, firebow sets ready for immediate use, even fire-carrying technology that allowed flames to be transported between locations. These people understood that fire failure meant death, and they planned accordingly. The social coordination required was staggering. Fire maintenance needed 24-hour attention during winter months. Someone had to gather fuel. Someone had to tend flames. Someone had to manage smoke and ash removal. This level of coordination required social structures, role specialization, and communication systems that went far beyond simple survival groups. The innovation never stopped. By 100,000 years ago, we see evidence of advanced fire technology that wouldn't be reinvented until medieval times. Controlled draft systems that regulated flame intensity, heat banking techniques that stored thermal energy in stones, even primitive fire-resistant materials that protected bedding from sparks and embers. The psychological impact was as important as the physical benefits. Fire transformed night from a time of terror into a time of safety and productivity. Archaeological evidence shows that most tool-making, food preparation, and social activities occurred around evening fires. These weren't just heating systems, they were the foundation of human culture. The energy efficiencies are mind-blowing. A properly managed cave fire could maintain livable temperatures for 30 to 40 people through the harshest winter conditions while consuming less fuel than a modern wood stove. The efficiency was achieved through careful cave selection, optimal fire placement, and heat circulation techniques that maximized every BTU. The integration with other technologies created synergistic effects. Fire-heated stones could be moved to bedding areas for localized warming. Smoke from specific plants repelled insects while providing heat. Hot coals could be buried under sleeping areas for all-night warmth. The entire cave became an integrated life support system. Perhaps most remarkably, the fire management shows evidence of individual innovation and improvement. Different caves show different heating techniques, suggesting ongoing experimentation and technological development. Knowledge was shared between groups, creating innovation networks that spanned continents and thousands of years. The mastery was so complete that some groups began using fire offensively, creating heat barriers that kept predators away, using smoke signals for long-distance communication, even employing controlled burns to modify landscapes for better hunting. Fire had gone from a tool for survival to a weapon for environmental control. By the time our ancestors began their global expansion, they weren't just carrying fire, they were carrying the knowledge to turn any cave, any shelter, any sleeping area into a warm, safe, comfortable home. They'd solved the fundamental problem that had killed most large mammals during ice ages: how to stay warm enough to survive the night. The cave fires that warmed our ancestors' bedding were more than just heating systems. They were the forges where human civilization was born. Every warm night, every comfortable sleep, every morning our ancestors woke up refreshed instead of dead, was another step toward the complex societies that would eventually conquer the planet. All because someone figured out how to sleep warm in a cold world. But the ultimate expression of Ice Age sleeping technology wasn't found in Africa or the Middle East. It was discovered in the frozen tundra of Eastern Europe, where archaeologists uncovered architectural achievements so sophisticated they rewrote the history of human engineering. Mammoth bone houses with integrated sleeping systems that turned the remains of giants into palaces for survivors. The first discovery at Mazhirek, Ukraine, left archaeologists speechless. Emerging from the permafrost was a structure built entirely from mammoth bones, skulls for foundations, tusks for framework, shoulder blades for walls. But this wasn't crude shelter construction. This was precision engineering that would challenge modern architects working with conventional materials. The numbers are staggering. 149 mammoths contributed to just 4 structures. That's 3,000 individual bones, each weighing between 50 and 200 pounds, precisely selected and positioned according to engineering principles that distributed weight, maximized thermal efficiency, and created living spaces that could house entire communities through Arctic winters. The construction techniques reveal sophisticated understanding of structural engineering. Mammoth skulls, each weighing over 200 pounds, were interlocked to create foundations that could support massive loads without shifting. Tusks were heated and bent into curves that formed architectural arches, an engineering principle that wouldn't be formally described until Roman times. Yet these Ice Age architects were using it 15,000 years earlier. But it's the interior design that reveals the true genius. The sleeping areas weren't afterthoughts. They were the central design principle around which everything else was built. Archaeological evidence shows dedicated sleeping zones with different thermal properties. Family areas near the center for maximum warmth. Individual spaces around the periphery, even specialized areas for the elderly and infants. The thermal engineering was extraordinary. Mammoth bones have natural insulating properties. The marrow cavities trap air, creating dead space that prevents heat transfer. But our ancestors improved on nature's design by selecting specific bones for specific functions. Skulls for foundations because they're the most insulating. Long bones for walls because they're the strongest. Ribs for roofing because they're the most flexible. The bedding integration was seamless. Inside these bone houses, archaeologists found evidence of sophisticated sleeping systems that combined all the technologies we've discussed. Grass mattresses for base comfort, fur coverings for warmth, and fire-heated stones for localized heating. But the mammoth bone architecture created something unprecedented. sleeping areas that maintained comfortable temperatures even when outside conditions dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The scale of these operations defies imagination. Each house required killing at least 40 adult mammoths, animals that stood 11 feet tall and could crush a human with a casual step. The logistics alone would challenge modern construction crews. How do you transport 60,000 pounds of mammoth bones across frozen tundra using only human labour? How do you coordinate the work of dozens of people for months at a time? How do you feed construction crews while they're building instead of hunting? The answer reveals social organisation that was far more complex than anyone imagined. These weren't desperate survivors throwing together emergency shelters. These were planned communities with specialised roles, coordinated labour, and long-term resource management. The mammoth bone houses represent the birth of human architecture. The moment we stopped adapting to our environment and started engineering it to suit our needs. The preservation at some sites is so complete we can see evidence of interior decoration. Mammoth bone furniture, sleeping platforms carved from shoulder blades, storage areas built into skull cavities, even artistic elements where bones were arranged in decorative patterns. These people weren't just surviving. They were creating homes complete with the aesthetic touches that make a house into a dwelling place. The heating systems were integrated into the architecture itself, central hearths positioned to maximize heat distribution, smoke holes cut through bone roofing, even thermal mass systems where certain bones were heated during the day to radiate warmth throughout the night. The entire structure functioned as a giant thermal regulation machine. But perhaps most remarkably, these houses show evidence of multi-generational occupation. Some sites contain evidence of renovation, expansion, even what appears to be inheritance. Newer construction built on foundations laid by previous generations. These weren't temporary shelters but permanent homes passed down through families across centuries. The site at Kostenki reveals the ultimate achievement, an entire village of mammoth bone houses, each with specialized functions, sleeping houses for families, workshop houses for toolmaking, storage houses for food preservation. This wasn't just architecture. It was urban planning 20,000 years before cities were supposed to exist. The psychological impact must have been profound. Imagine sleeping inside the bones of the giants that once terrorized your ancestors. Every night, surrounded by mammoth skulls and ribs, our ancestors were reminded of their victory over forces that had seemed invincible. They'd gone from hiding from mammoths to living inside them, the ultimate expression of human dominance over nature. The acoustic properties were carefully considered. Mammoth bone chambers have natural resonance that amplifies sound, but the interior arrangements show evidence of acoustic engineering. Sleeping areas positioned to minimize noise transmission. Common areas designed to enhance communication. These people understood that comfortable living required not just physical comfort, but acoustic comfort. The environmental control extended beyond heating. Ventilation systems built into bone arrangements provided fresh air without creating drafts. Drainage systems prevented moisture buildup that could cause hypothermia. Even humidity control. Certain bone arrangements prevented the air from becoming too dry or too moist for comfortable breathing. The maintenance systems reveal long-term thinking that spanned seasons and years. Bone replacement schedules for elements that weathered over time, structural reinforcement added as buildings aged, even preventive maintenance evidence of regular inspection. And now that the ice had melted and the giants were gone, humanity faced a new challenge, remembering what they had destroyed. The old stories weren't enough anymore. Cave paintings could capture the mammoth's tusks, the bear's claws, but they couldn't preserve the thunder of 10,000 hooves across the tundra. They couldn't hold the sound of the last mammoth's trumpet echoing across empty valleys. So our ancestors did something revolutionary. They turned their trauma into technology. The invention of complex language wasn't just about communication, it was about preservation. Every grammatical structure, every verb tense, every way we have of describing time and causation emerged from the desperate need to pass down the memory of what we'd lost. Future tense exists because someone needed to warn their children about consequences they'd never see. Past perfect emerged because someone had to explain how the world used to be full of giants. Doctor, the deepest roots of human language are planted in extinction guilt. But language alone wasn't enough. The survivors needed institutions, systems that could carry forward not just the memory of giants, but the lesson of what happens when intelligence meets ecosystem. The first religions weren't worship of invisible gods. They were elaborate apology systems for visible absences. Archaeological evidence from Göbekli Tepe in Turkey shows something unprecedented. The world's first monumental architecture built by hunter-gatherers 11,500 years ago. But look closer at the carvings. Every pillar depicts the same theme: humans surrounded by animals they'd driven extinct. This wasn't celebration. It was memorial architecture. The first temple was a gilt cathedral. The agricultural revolution that followed wasn't just about growing food, it was about growing forgiveness. If you could make the land produce, if you could create abundance from scarcity, maybe you could atone for what you'd taken. Every furrow was penance, every harvest a prayer for redemption. Cities emerge from the same psychological need. When you've emptied the world of everything magnificent, you have to build magnificence yourself. The first ziggurats weren't reaching toward gods. They were trying to replace the giants whose absence made the horizon feel too flat, too empty, too human. Even our concept of time changed. Before the extinctions, human societies lived in cyclical time. Seasons returned, herds migrated, everything came back. After the giants fell, we invented linear time, history with a beginning, middle, and end. Progress towards something better, because the past was unbearable to revisit. The psychological transformation was complete. We became the first species that knew it was alone. Every human innovation since, art, music, literature, science, space exploration, has been an attempt to fill the giant-shaped hole in our psyche. We've been trying to become worthy of the empty world we inherited. But here's the twist that paleopsychologists are just beginning to understand. The guilt was adaptive. Societies that developed elaborate systems for remembering and mourning their ecological crimes became the most innovative, the most successful, the most driven to transcend their origins. The shame of killing giants made us giants ourselves. Modern humans still carry this in our neural architecture. Why do children love dinosaurs? Because we're hardwired to mourn giant reptiles we never met. Why do we cry at movies about extinct species? Because grief for lost megafauna is encoded in our emotional operating system. Why do we build skyscrapers, write symphonies, launch rockets toward the stars? Because we're still trying to prove we deserve the planet we emptied. Every conservation effort, Every national park, every Endangered Species Act is a love letter to the mammoths we'll never see again. We've spent the last 10,000 years trying to become the kind of species the giants could trust. The tragedy is, we had to kill them all to learn how. The final irony, our greatest achievements as a species flow directly from our greatest crime. The guilt that built civilization, the shame that sparked innovation, the desperate need to become worthy of forgiveness from creatures that can no longer grant it. We are the children of extinction, raised by regret, educated by absence. Every human alive today is the descendant of survivors who carried forward not just genes but grief, not just tools but trauma, not just stories but the terrible knowledge that intelligence without wisdom leads to emptiness. The giants are gone, but their ghosts build everything we call human. We live in monuments to their memory, speak languages shaped by their absence, and dream of futures where we might finally deserve the trust we betrayed. 30,000 years later, we're still writing that apology letter, still trying to fill a mammoth-shaped hole in our souls, still searching for redemption in a world we made too small for anything but us. The Ice Age ended, but the Guilt Age has just begun, and perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the weight of what we've done is what keeps us reaching toward what we might become. In the end, we didn't just survive the Ice Age. We survived becoming the only species that knows what it means to be alone with the consequences of its intelligence. And from that terrible knowledge, we built everything beautiful about being human. The mammoths would probably forgive us by now. But here's where the archaeological record gets absolutely mind-blowing. While Hollywood keeps pushing this image of primitive cave people huddled around pathetic fires, shivering in animal skins, the reality uncovered at sites like Sibudu Cave in South Africa rewrites everything we thought we knew about Ice Age survival. We're not talking about desperate scavenging for warmth. We're talking about prehistoric engineering that would make modern camping enthusiasts look like rank amateurs. Picture this. 77,000 years ago, someone designed the world's first luxury mattress system. Not a pile of random leaves thrown on cold stone, but a deliberately engineered sleep surface consisting of at least 15 layers of carefully selected materials. Sedge grass formed the foundation, chosen specifically for its structural properties. On top, leaves from. Cryptocarya woodii were selected not randomly, but because when crushed, these leaves emit chemical compounds that repel insects. This wasn't luck. This was sophisticated material science applied to bedroom design. The numbers are staggering. These prehistoric mattresses measured up to 22 square feet, large enough for an entire family. At an estimated 12 inches thick, they provided comfort that would rival expensive modern bedding. But here's the kicker. This wasn't a one-time innovation. Archaeological evidence shows mat-making continued at this site for 40,000 years. 40,000 years! That's longer than all of recorded human history. Think about what that means. Generation after generation refined these techniques, passing down knowledge of which grasses provided the best support, which leaves offered superior insect protection, how to layer materials for optimal comfort and durability. This was a sleeping technology so successful it outlasted entire ice ages. But Sibudu Cave was just the beginning. At Border Cave, also in South Africa, researchers discovered evidence of an even more sophisticated sleep system, dating back 200,000 years. Here's where it gets really wild. These ancient humans weren't just building comfortable beds, they were creating integrated pest management systems that would impress modern exterminators. The genius was in the ash. They deliberately burned old bedding, then spread the ash across sleeping areas before laying down fresh grass bundles. Why? Because ash blocks insects' breathing apparatus and eventually dehydrates them. It's a completely natural, non-toxic pesticide that required zero chemistry knowledge but produced pharmaceutical-grade results. They'd literally figured out how to sleep bug-free in caves teeming with parasites,